I still remember the exact moment I realized my mother-in-law wanted me gone. Not gone, as in ignored, or cut out of family gatherings. No, she wanted me gone as in out of this world, 6 feet under, buried before my time. And the terrifying part? She thought she was smart enough to get away with it. It was my 32nd birthday, and my wife Haley had convinced me to go to dinner with her family. Honestly, I hadn't wanted to. Over the years, every interaction with my in-laws had been like walking barefoot over glass. Gerald, my father-in-law, was a retired investment banker who treated me like a stray dog Haley had dragged into his pristine home. Diane, my mother-in-law, had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes and could cut you down without raising her voice. To them, I wasn't a husband, I wasn't even a man with a career. I was that photographer, the one wasting his life chasing after birds and sunsets instead of chasing dollar signs. But Haley insisted, and she had that hopeful look in her eyes. She wanted peace, or at least some kind of fragile truce between me and her parents. So I put on my best shirt, plastered on a smile, and told myself to survive 2 hours. Just 2 hours of nodding, eating, and ignoring Gerald's little digs about how real men build portfolios, not photo albums. The evening played out the way it usually did. Gerald bragged about the stock market like he personally held it up with his bare hands. Diane complimented Haley, subtly twisting the knife with little remarks about how Haley could have married into better circles. Haley squeezed my knee under the table each time, silently begging me not to react. I swallowed my pride with every bite of overcooked salmon, telling myself I could endure it for her. And then it happened. Diane brought out a tray of drinks, smiling that brittle, rehearsed smile of hers. A special cocktail for the birthday boy, she announced, placing a tall glass in front of me. The liquid was an odd shade of amber, with a faint smell that didn't match anything I recognized. I lifted the glass, forcing another smile, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught something strange. Diane's hand lingered just a second too long near the rim, her eyes flicking to Gerald's with the tiniest nod. It wasn't obvious, but I'd learned to read the silent language of contempt over the years. And in that instant, a cold realization settled in my stomach. Something was wrong with that drink. I hesitated, glass hovering near my lips. Diane noticed, and her smile froze. "Go on, Julian," she urged softly, almost too softly. "It's made just for you." Now, I'm not a paranoid man. But I've spent enough time in the wild, tracking predators, waiting for hours in silence, to know when something dangerous is circling. My instincts screamed at me not to drink. So, with a calmness I didn't even know I had, I made a choice. I laughed, pretending to stumble, and in the motion, I swapped my glass with Gerald's. He barely noticed, too busy boasting about a golf game. Minutes later, Gerald lifted the glass and downed half of it in one gulp. Diane's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, her knuckles whitening against the edge of the table. I filed that reaction away in my mind like a photograph. At first, nothing happened. The conversation continued, more talk of hedge funds, Haley nervously trying to keep the peace, me nodding along while my heart pounded against my ribs. But then Gerald's words began to slur. He frowned, pressing a hand to his temple. "Strange," he muttered, blinking rapidly. Within minutes, his face turned pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Dad? Are you okay?" Haley asked, half rising from her chair. Gerald tried to answer, but his words came out garbled, his head lolling as if he'd had too much to drink. Diane jumped up, but not towards him, towards me. Her eyes were sharp, wild for just a split second before she masked it. "Julian, what did you do?" she hissed. The accusation was almost laughable, except for the fact that my heart was thundering. I kept my face calm, my voice even. I didn't do anything. He drank what you gave him. Haley's voice was panicked now, calling for an ambulance, pressing a cold cloth to her father's forehead as he groaned. Diane fluttered around, playing the concerned wife, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes every time she glanced at me. She knew what had happened. And I knew too. By the time the paramedics arrived, Gerald was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently. They rushed him to the hospital, and the whole house dissolved into chaos. Haley was in tears, torn between her father's condition and the tension snapping like wires between me and her mother. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. But when no one was looking, I slipped Gerald's half-empty glass into my jacket pocket. That glass, I knew, held the truth. As the ambulance pulled away, Diane turned to me, her voice low and venomous. If you ever breathe a word about this, you'll regret it. I met her gaze without flinching. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small under her stare. Instead, I felt something else, something sharp, cold, and determined. Because in that moment, I wasn't just her son-in-law. I was her enemy. And she had just declared war. The night Gerald collapsed at the dinner table, I didn't sleep a wink. Haley cried herself to exhaustion, curled against me on the couch while we waited for updates from the hospital. I held her, whispered reassurances, but inside, my mind was racing. I couldn't stop replaying that moment, the flicker of Diane's eyes when she realized Gerald had drunk from the wrong glass. The way she accused me instantly, not even hesitating. I kept my jacket close the entire night. Inside the pocket was that half-empty glass, wrapped in a napkin like contraband. It felt heavier than it should, as if it contained more than liquid. It held answers. Maybe even the proof I needed to confirm the horrible suspicion gnawing at me. The next morning, I drove to a private lab in town. Being a photographer had its perks. I'd built connections over the years, people who trusted me. I handed the glass to a tech I knew, asked for a discreet toxicology test, and told him to call me directly with results. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. 3 days later, the call came. Julian, whatever was in that drink, it wasn't alcohol. We found benzodiazepines in high concentration. Enough to knock someone out cold. Maybe worse, depending on their health. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in silence. My hands shook, but my chest felt strangely steady. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't some twisted imagination. Diane had actually tried to drug me. And now, thanks to Gerald's mistake, I had proof. Still, proof is just paper until someone believes it. And when your enemy is your wife's own mother, even paper feels flimsy. Haley was fragile, torn up over her father's sudden illness, clinging to the idea that it was stress or age. How could I look into her tear-streaked face and tell her that her mother had poisoned me? For now, I kept it to myself. But I began to dig deeper. I searched our home, old drawers, and cabinets, piecing together a trail I'd never noticed before. Diane had multiple prescriptions for benzodiazepines, renewed under different names and pharmacies. A quiet pattern of stockpiling. My gut told me this wasn't her first attempt at manipulation, maybe just the first time someone had swapped glasses. Then came the unexpected ally. Vanessa, Haley's younger sister, called me one afternoon. She never liked me much, never disliked me either. But her voice was tense. Julian, I need to show you something. Don't tell Mom. She drove over that evening, a nervous wreck. She handed me a USB stick. The cameras. Mom doesn't know I still have access. I plugged it into my laptop, heart hammering as the footage played. There it was, Diane, standing at the counter with 2 glasses. She poured the cocktail, glanced over her shoulder, and with the calmness of someone making tea, she tipped a vial of pills into 1 glass. She stirred, smiled to herself, and carried both into the dining room. Vanessa couldn't even watch the whole clip. She looked away, tears brimming. She did the same thing to me once. Different context, same method. She wanted me to stay away from a guy I loved in college. Said he wasn't our type. I woke up in the hospital with no memory of the night. Dad backed her up. Said it was my fault for drinking too much. Her confession hit me like a truck. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Gerald. Diane had a history of controlling people by force when her words failed. But the video had more. After Gerald collapsed, the footage caught Diane in the kitchen whispering to him. You weren't supposed to drink that. You'll be fine, but he won't get away with this. I'll make sure Haley sees him for who he really is. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about getting rid of me, it was about destroying my marriage, my life, everything I'd built with Haley. The next few days were torture. I'd sit at the hospital with Haley, holding her hand while Diane played the perfect wife at Gerald's bedside. She'd squeeze my shoulder with fake sympathy, whispering, "This must be so hard for you." I bit my tongue until it bled, my mind screaming with what I knew. Finally, one night when Haley and I were alone, I decided to test the waters. I told her I'd had Gerald's drink tested. Her eyes widened, alarmed. "Julian, what are you saying?" I explained slowly, carefully. I didn't accuse, didn't throw her mother under the bus. I just told her the facts, the benzodiazepines, the strange behavior, the evidence. Haley's face went pale. She shook her head, tears streaming. No. No, my mom would never. She can be controlling, yes, but this? You're wrong. You have to be wrong. I wanted to reach for the USB, shove the footage in front of her, force her to see the truth. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled, the way she clung to the last threads of belief in her family. I knew she wasn't ready. Not yet. So I swallowed the urge and let her cry, whispering that I loved her, that I'd protect her no matter what. Inside, though, my resolve hardened. Diane had declared war, and wars aren't won by rushing the first battle. They're won by strategy, by patience, by striking when the enemy least expects it. I didn't just want to survive Diane anymore. I wanted to expose her. I wanted her own family to see her for what she was. And when the time came, I wanted her to lose everything she'd ever used as a weapon, her control, her reputation, her power. She thought she was the queen on this board. But she'd underestimated me. And I was ready to play the long game. The evidence sat on my desk like a loaded gun. The toxicology report, the stack of Diane's prescriptions, Vanessa's tearful confession, and most damning of all, the security footage showing Diane poisoning my drink. Each piece was a nail in the coffin she'd built for herself, and I was the one holding the hammer. But timing mattered. If I rushed it, Diane would twist the story, paint me as paranoid, manipulative, maybe even dangerous. Haley's heart was still tangled in loyalty to her parents. She needed more than words, she needed to see the truth for herself, undeniable and raw. So I planned a confrontation. A final dinner. The Last Supper, if you will, but this time the poisoned glass would be metaphorical. I invited everyone, Haley, her brother Owen, Vanessa, and of course, Diane and Gerald. I rented a private room at a quiet restaurant, neutral territory. Haley thought it was about healing wounds. Diane thought it was about me begging for forgiveness. Gerald probably thought it was about money, as usual. But only I knew the real reason. When they arrived, the tension was thick enough to slice. Gerald sat stiffly, pale from his recent hospital stay but still trying to project authority. Owen looked suspicious, probably because he never trusted me fully. Vanessa was silent, her eyes darting nervously. Haley sat close to me, her fingers gripping mine as if she could anchor herself in the storm she knew was coming. And Diane, she was radiant with smugness, dressed to perfection, her smile sharp as ever. She thought she'd already won. I started slow, talking about family, about honesty, about how secrets rot people from the inside out. Diane rolled her eyes subtly, Gerald tapped his fork impatiently. Then I set my laptop on the table, opened a folder, and pressed play. The screen lit up with footage of Diane in the kitchen, pouring the cocktail, slipping in the powder, stirring it with that practiced calm. The sound was clear, the video undeniable. Haley gasped. Owen's jaw dropped. Vanessa stared at her plate, ashamed but relieved the truth was finally out. Gerald blanched, his hand tightening on the tablecloth. Diane froze for half a second, then composed herself. This is ridiculous. Out of context. Julian is manipulating all of you. I cut her off with the toxicology report, sliding it across the table like a card in a poker game. That's what was in the drink. Benzodiazepines. Enough to incapacitate me. The only reason I'm sitting here is because Gerald drank from the wrong glass. Haley covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Diane's mask cracked, just for a moment. She reached across the table, voice trembling with rehearsed indignation. Sweetheart, you know your husband is dramatic. He's trying to turn you against me. He hates this family. He always has. Before I could respond, Vanessa spoke. Her voice shook, but her words cut through like steel. He's not lying. She did the same thing to me in college. She drugged me because she didn't like the man I was dating. I woke up in a hospital. Dad backed her up. I thought I imagined it, but, seeing this, I know I didn't. The silence that followed was suffocating. Owen looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Mom? Is this true? His voice cracked, the disbelief raw. Gerald cleared his throat, his attempt at control faltering. Enough. We don't need to air dirty laundry like this. Diane was only trying to protect the family. Julian, name your price. If it's money you want, we can arrange something. That was the moment I realized just how deep their rot went. It wasn't just Diane. Gerald was complicit, enabling her all along. My stomach churned with disgust. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. I don't want your money. I don't want your approval. What I want is freedom, for Haley, for Vanessa, for all of us. You don't get to control us anymore. Not with your power, not with your money, not with your poison. Diane's mask shattered then. She slammed her hand on the table, eyes blazing. You ungrateful little, do you have any idea what we've given Haley? The life we've built? You think you can take her from us? Haley stood up, her chair scraping back. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it. You didn't give me life, Mom. You tried to control it. You tried to take Julian from me. And I'm done. Her words landed like a thunderclap. For years, Diane had pulled Haley's strings, but in that moment, the strings snapped. Gerald sputtered, tried to speak, but Owen interrupted him. I can't believe this. I looked up to you both. And this is who you really are? His voice dripped with disgust. Vanessa finally lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. I've been waiting years for this day. The table was chaos, voices overlapping, years of buried resentment exploding all at once. But through it all, I sat steady, watching Diane's empire of control crumble piece by piece. By the end of the night, it was clear. Diane and Gerald weren't just exposed, they were powerless. Their children had seen the truth, and no amount of money or manipulation could erase it. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just surviving Diane anymore. I'd beaten her. But the war wasn't fully over. Because destroying someone like Diane doesn't end with one dinner. It ends when you take away the very thing they value most, control. And I was ready to finish what I started. The fallout from that night was like watching a fortress collapse. Diane and Gerald didn't just lose control of me, they lost control of their own children. For years, they had been the puppeteers, pulling strings from the shadows. But once the strings snapped, there was no putting them back together. In the weeks that followed, Diane tried to do damage control. She called Haley repeatedly, leaving voicemails dripping with fake remorse. Sweetheart, you have to understand, I was only trying to protect you. Julian twisted everything. Gerald wrote long emails about family legacy, about wealth and duty, about how we'd regret turning our backs on opportunity. Haley didn't respond. She blocked their numbers, deleted their messages, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw her shoulders relax. The invisible weight of pleasing her parents had finally lifted. Vanessa moved closer to us, too. She'd been distant for years, suffocated under Diane's watchful eye, but now she visited often, sometimes staying over just to escape the toxic silence of her parents' home. With her around, our little house was filled with laughter again. It felt like a family, messy, real, and free. But Diane wasn't done. Control was her oxygen, and she was suffocating without it. A month later, Gerald showed up at my studio. He stood there in his expensive suit, pale and tired, looking every bit the man whose empire was cracking. He offered me a deal. Julian, he said, voice low, we can make all this go away. Join my firm. I'll put you on salary. You'll have money, status. Haley will never have to worry again. All I ask is that you stay quiet about everything. I almost laughed in his face. You still don't get it, do you? I don't want your money. I don't want your world. That's why you'll never understand me. He sneered, muttering something about how I'd regret my stubbornness, then left. But I knew the truth, his offer wasn't power. It was desperation. And refusing it felt better than any revenge I could have plotted. Life began to bloom in ways Diane and Gerald could never control. Haley and I went to therapy together, working through the scars of years under their thumb. We grew stronger, more honest, more unshakable. 6 months later, we found out Haley was pregnant. When she told me, tears in her eyes, I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about building a future that was ours alone. We made the announcement to family carefully. Vanessa cried with joy. Owen, still reeling from the confrontation, called to apologize for doubting me and promised to be the best uncle he could. Diane and Gerald? They heard the news secondhand, and for once, they had no say in how it unfolded. But the biggest shock came quietly. One afternoon, an envelope arrived at our door. Inside was paperwork, a house deed and a trust fund. Gerald had transferred them to Haley, no strings attached. There was no letter, no conditions, just the cold signature of a man finally conceding. I realized then that even people like Gerald and Diane know when they've lost. They couldn't force us back into their control, so they tried the only thing left, silence and surrender. We didn't flaunt it. We didn't rub it in their faces. Instead, we poured our energy into the life we were building. I opened my first gallery show, showcasing years of photographs from my travels. It wasn't Wall Street money, but the room was packed, and for the first time in my career, I felt respected for who I was, not compared to what I wasn't. Haley stood beside me that night, hand resting on her growing belly, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen. Vanessa snapped photos of us, laughing about how she finally understood why I loved photography so much. It was about capturing truth, even when people tried to hide it. And then, as the night wound down, I saw them. Diane and Gerald. Standing quietly in the back of the gallery, not daring to come forward. For once, they weren't the center of attention. They weren't controlling the narrative. They were just watching. Silent. Powerless. I didn't acknowledge them. I didn't need to. My life, my marriage, my family, everything they'd tried to poison, literally and figuratively, was thriving without them. That was the real revenge. Not shouting, not gloating, not tearing them down. The real revenge was living well, free from their control. Because the truth is, people like Diane and Gerald feed on power. They thrive on manipulation, on making others feel small. The best way to beat them isn't by playing their game, it's by refusing to play it at all. So when I look back at that birthday dinner, at the poisoned glass that started it all, I don't see a near-death experience anymore. I see the moment I stopped being their victim. I see the moment I took my life back. And as I hold Haley's hand, as we prepare to welcome our child into the world, I know one thing for certain: Diane and Gerald can keep their wealth, their reputation, their crumbling empire. I already have everything they'll never touch: freedom, love, and a family built on truth. That, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all.